Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to the Cranbrook Art Museum. I'm Andrew Blauvelt, the director. Welcome out of the rain. It's a little misty. It looks so beautiful out there. We hope you have a chance to see the exhibitions, which we just opened yesterday night. There's actually 5 exhibitions on view upstairs. There'll be time after this conversation as well to check out those shows, including Keith Haring, The End of the Line, Ryan McGinnis Studio Views, Ryan McGinnis Collection Views, and Maya Stovall Liquor Store Theater Performance Films. So along with, of course, Basquiat, before Basquiat, East 12th Street, 1979 to 1980. This series of exhibitions explores a relationship between street culture and studio practice, and many of the artists, some like Basquiat, transition from one to the other. Some kind of interlope between those realms continuously throughout their careers. We thought this was an appropriate set of exhibitions to bring to the Detroit area, which is of course known for its street art and particularly in contemporary sense for its muralist. So we're very pleased that we could present all of these exhibitions. And how this will work, I will introduce our guest curator who curated the Basquiat Before Basquiat exhibition, Nora Abrams, and she will introduce our panelists to discuss this kind of seminal period in Basquiat's life, and of which many people are now coming back to realize just how important and formative this was in his overall career. So without further ado, I'll introduce Nora. So Nora Abrams is curator at MCA Denver, the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver. Since arriving in Denver in 2010, she has organized over 30 exhibitions and authored or contributed to nearly a dozen accompanying publications. So she doesn't sleep.
I have 2 kids also.
You're a vampire, I think. And 2 kids, oh my God. Recent projects have highlighted unusual or unknown episodes in artists' careers such as Basquiat Before Basquiat, which is organized in 2017, as well as the first survey of Senga Nanguta's RSVP sculptures in 2014. She has taught art history at New York University and has lectured throughout the country on modern and contemporary art. She holds art history degrees from Stanford University and Columbia University, and her doctorate from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. Please help me welcome Nora Abrams.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to your amazing staff and team here. I couldn't be, and I know I speak for all of MCA Denver when I say that we couldn't be more thrilled to have this project here, and it has been such a pleasure working with everyone on your team. And Sarah, I can't see you, but wherever you are, Sarah, thank you for all that you did to make today happen, especially, including printing out something at the last minute for me. So anyway, thank you all for being here on this Saturday afternoon. You will hopefully not hear very much from me and much more from my 3 friends up here. I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to launch into a conversation about various things relating to the Basquiat Before Basquiat exhibition, and then I think we'll have some time for questions at the end. So to my immediate right, I want to introduce you all to Felice Rosser, who is a singer, songwriter, bass player, actor, and writer. She is the leader of the New York City-based rock group Faith, which has released 3 recordings on Worldwide Vibe Records. Her writing has appeared in Bomb magazine, and she also has a piece in the book that accompanies the exhibition, Basquiat Before Basquiat. And she appeared as well in the film Permanent Vacation, which was directed by Jim Jarmusch, a friend of all of yours. I'm going to then go to, and most importantly, Felice is born and raised in Detroit. So hello. How could I not include that? Where was I on that piece? Sorry. The wonderful Carlo McCormick is a culture critic and curator who is based in New York City, and he still doesn't know how to drive, which is remarkable, nor does he use Uber, so it's amazing that he got here. He walked all the way from New York. But more importantly, he is an author of so many important books and monographs on contemporary art and specific artists, including, and he has some work in the recently published Basquiat Boom for Real, which just opened at the Barbican Center in London, and is a traveling exhibition. Excuse me. As well, He curated the exhibition, The Downtown Show, which debuted at the Gray Art Gallery in 2006. And it was really the first ever project to study the richly varied art and culture from the late 70s and early 80s in Lower Manhattan. And currently, he is working on a retrospective of the graffiti artist Rommel Z, who was a legendary artist and writer, and who early on collaborated with Basquiat. And last but not least, Alexis Adler is an embryologist by training and by profession who lives and works in New York City. But for the purposes of this conversation, this is not a lecture on embryology. We are all here, frankly, because of Alexis. She met Jean-Michel Basquiat in the spring of 1979, after which they actually soon began living with Felice, crashing in her apartment. And when Alexis found an apartment on East 12th Street in September of that year, she and Jean moved in, and it offered the artist actually his first permanent address since running away from home the prior year. It was a space that she often says was full of art and full of love. And it is really due to Alexis's courage and determination and her vision that we are all here today. So thank you all. So let's get this party started. One thing that I would love to talk about, particularly Andrew kind of alluded to it at the beginning, is this exhibition explores what unfolded within the walls of your apartment in the East Village over the course of 1 year. But as presented here and in conversation with the Keith Haring and the Maya Stovall and Ryan McGinnis, the narrative is also very much, I think, about what was unfolding on the streets of New York at that time. Can you give us a context a little bit more of the kind of what was happening in music and performance and really what was unfolding in the streets that was maybe mirrored by what was happening in your apartment?
Well, to start with, I mean, I had seen Jean's graffiti before I met him, and it was incredibly intriguing. And I knew this was special, along with a number of people from the downtown scene, I would say. And I mean, this looks kind of nice compared to the streets were very gritty, and it was kind of a dangerous time in New York.
Can you give us a couple of anecdotes that relate to that?
Well,
how did you find your apartment?
Okay, well, I could tell you how the night I actually met Jean was we were at a roving party, and I was with Felice, and I was introduced to Jean. I was very excited to meet him, and after the party ended, it was sort of a group of us. We sort of rolled out of this. It wasn't a club. I can't even picture, but it was somewhere down in Lower Manhattan. And I sort of jokingly pretended to open a car door, like a fancy car door that was right outside. And it opened, surprisingly, and I shut it quickly. And then some guys came out and was like, "What are you doing with our car?" and pushed me to the ground. And Jean came out, and he sort of intervened and
smoothed it over.
There was a little fight. There was a broken bottle, as I recall, or a knife, and but these things happen. But Jean had intervened in my behalf. We became friends after that.
And to what extent, can you paint a picture for us of, obviously we have photographs and we have documentation of the apartment when you guys moved in together, which I imagine is pretty similar to the apartment that you had at the time, Felice, when these two crashed with you. But I always want to make the point to people, it's not like he had this separate studio space where he would go and work. That when we're talking about how he would make work in the apartment, it was literally, the apartment was the canvas.
Right. I mean, when Jean, moved in, just as he would anywhere, it was just, he was all about art, and whatever he was always thinking, doing art. And if the wall presented itself, that's what he was painting on, or the floor, or some cardboard boxes that he found from the street, or a suitcase, or whatever. He was just always doing art, and it was all over the apartment.
Carlo, can you talk about how for a lot of artists the street was kind of a muse?
Yeah, it was.
At the time?
Because I've been coming into Detroit for a bunch of decades now and really love that city. And I can say it's really not that much of a stretch for anyone who's lived in Detroit for a while. The sense of abandonment that happens and kind of what grows in the cracks of that abandonment, the sense of refuse and in terms of trash, but also kind of in terms of refusal. I think we all felt a little discarded at that time, and it's just out of that it becomes a really fecund kind of landscape topography that's all open. So yeah, people were making art on the streets and in the streets, but they were also hauling crap off the streets into Alexis' apartment and making art out of that too. So it was, now we talk about recycling and sustainability. It kind of had that hardwired into its system. That in that void, it's not oppressive. It's actually a lot can grow, and I think that Detroit has to be careful for what it wishes for with all the gentrification and real estate development, but kind of treasure being a broken city, because broken cities are kind of phenomenal places, and we're now at this point in a world where more people live in the city than live outside the city for the first time ever, and we have to rethink cities. And I think that we were a generation that were really lucky to kind of come into this thing, which had really just been kind of left on the side of the street, and with a big white flight from the city and stuff like that. And I think that really informed the art. And the city has long been a muse, of course.
Yes. And Felice, when you, I know you and Alexis attended Barnard together with a couple of other friends who might be in the audience. And can you talk about how, as soon as you graduated, there was only one place you wanted to be?
Well, for me, especially being from Detroit, Detroit is rock city for me. I've always loved music, and I've always loved, the music, a very extremely, extraordinarily rich musical heritage that is Detroit. And coming from, at the time that I came to New York, leaving here in '74 or so, and coming from seeing, Led Zeppelin at Cobo Hall and Jethro Tull and Parliament Funkadelic and Rufus at the Olympia, and then going to New York at that specific moment, and when we heard, Patti Smith came to read at our college, and and she said at that reading, which I was not at, but my friend Bud Clement, who's there, was at, and she said, "Oh, you guys need to come downtown. My band and I are playing at this place downtown. You guys should come downtown." So we started going downtown to CBGBs to see. I never saw Patti Smith at CBGBs, but we did. Buddy and I, on I don't want to, birthday, we went to this club in New York called Reno Sweeney's, and we ended up sitting to see Patti Smith, and we ended up sitting next to her guitarist, Lenny Kaye's, his girlfriend, and she said, "Oh, after this, we're going to this place on the Bowery, you guys should come see this great band." And Buddy and I had like $25, and the bill at Reno Sweeney's was like $25. And we said, what should we do? And we said, well, let's just leave the 5 on the table and like kind of cover it with a napkin, and let's just run. So that's what we did, and I've since have worked at many restaurants and had people run out on me, and I just take it as karma, so I don't get mad. And so Buddy and I ran, and Reno Sweeney's was like 18th Street or 23rd Street, and we were like, well, how do we get there? They said the Bowery. And so we took the 6th train, we got off the 6th train, and now if you see the Bowery in New York, it's all these fancy hotels and so many people and expensive restaurants and stores, Jean Varvatos and everything. But then you get out on the Bowery and it's black.
Desolate.
Black. And there's some, homeless men like huddled around a trash can with a fire going, to keep, it was April, so, and there's like, I've said that there are newspapers and cardboard boxes running down the street like tumbleweeds, it was just desolate. And we were like, where is this place? And we're kind of scared because there is no one on the street. And we're like, where is this place? And then we looked and we saw, 315 Bow. We saw a little dirty awning. We said, that must be the place. So we walked in, and that was CBGBs, and we walked in to see television, and there were like 6 people there, or like 10 people there, many of whom were members of Patti Smith's group. And I, coming from Detroit, the background I come from, with the Stooges, with the New York Dolls, with Led Zeppelin and all, with the Temptations and all that, and you walk in, and these guys are playing this music, and you're like, what, you mean it can be small as well as big? It doesn't have to be 20,000 seats? It can be 12 people? And I was like, wait a minute, whoa, you mean, and you can actually meet the person, they don't actually, are not whisked off in a limousine afterward, but you can actually hang out at the bar with the bass player and get to know him and become his friend, and you're like, where am I? This is like heaven. And I was like, so when I graduated, I was like, you can get this apartment, because Luke, my friend Luke, worked at the Strand, which is a bookstore, and his friend was like, you can get an apartment for, $260. And everybody was like, $260, that's too much. That's a lot of money. Don't take that apartment. And I had like some internship, and I was like, no, I think I'm gonna take that apartment. And so, that's where we wanted to go. That's where we wanted to go, to just be near it, because it wasn't like a big art scene. It was like your friends, and they're all walking around the streets, and you're just hanging out. You go to the Strand, or you go to the B&H, and it's just alive. You go to the Kiev, and these are all your friends, but they also are making work, or going, so I wanted to be there. Sorry, I talked too much.
That was amazing.
That was great.
It's amazing. Where was your apartment, that first apartment?
First Avenue and A Street,
And
St.
A
Mark's
Street.
Place. Vivian Dick, who's a filmmaker, she lived around the corner, and her apartment was $60 a month. And everybody, so $60, $260, but I was working, because I'm from here, I'm from the D, and you're gonna be working, You know how to work. You've been doing it since you were 12. So it's like, I'll have me a little job.
And it sounds like your home was initially kind of an anchor point or a gathering place for a lot of people.
Our place was just, we had like a little futon, or not even a futon, foam. You
Like
go
a
down in
mattress,
Bowery and get you a little foam and put an Indian bedspread over it, and hey, that's it.
That was where
You
you sat.
got a couch, you got
Milk
a
crates.
Milk crates, definitely.
milk crates, and you had your stereo, you had your speakers, and that was it. You were good, and then friends keep coming by, and Alexis, nobody had a bell that worked, so people go, yo, Alexis, yo, and they throw down the key and the
In a sock,
Sock,
yeah.
right?
and that was, it was
And how
great.
did you first meet Jean?
Oh, well, we used to hang out, at this club called the Mud Club, right? And, it was a
It
very,
was before the mud, was it?
I used to see him, because, maybe y'all don't know, but some of y'all know how black folks are, right? So we, like, in a scene, a dance scene and whatever, and there'll be a few blacks there, right? And so we would notice each other. You might not say anything, you might, because you didn't know them personally, but you go, oh, okay, he's here, okay, she's here. So, and you would feel close to them, because these were some people doing something different than what black folks are supposed to be doing. They were doing something different. We all liked this weird music we all like going to these weird clubs, dancing with these weird people. And, you know, and so we all like checked each other. Michael Coleman, Jennifer, this guy, Buzz, from, you know, his brother who was into rockabilly. You know, that was his thing. So he would wear, he had a buzz cut, he would wear like rockabilly clothes and stuff. But hey, Buzz, what's up? You know, you don't get into his shit too much, but you just, hey, how you doing? And keep it moving, you know, like that. But you know, okay, or the guy from the Plasmatics, you know, you're like, hey, Jean, what's up? And but you don't get too deep into their shit, but you acknowledge them, you know? So I would see Jean-Michel at the Mud Club with like a lab coat on, you know, and he'd be like doing his weird Jeffrey Wright got that really right, you know, that dance.
That's like the only thing that he maybe got right.
Yeah, but he got, what is it?
His
That,
intonation.
You got it right.
that was Jean's style, and so, you know, so I would check this guy out with his lab coat and his like weird haircut. Every week a different haircut. I go, okay, the brother's cool, he's cool. Plus he was 4 years, he was younger. So at that time, 4 years younger was huge, you know. Oh, he's young, but he's all right. So we just check him out. And then one day, I was walking down St. Mark's Place in front of Club 57, and there was that weird guy in a lab coat just standing there. He looked at me, I looked at him, he said, hey. And I said, hey. And he goes, I say, you know, we just start talking, how you doing? And he was friendly, he was warm. He wasn't weird and distant, he was really friendly and nice. And so we just start talking and say, like, hey, well, what are you doing tonight? Oh, I'm going to Max's. Okay, you want to come? Okay. And so we start to become friends, you know. And so that's how I met him, in front of Club 57.
But during the day, not like
No,
at
at night.
Oh, at night, okay.
But not in Club 57,
right.
but just walking by. And I said, oh, there he is, hey. And he was cool.
Can you talk about maybe the role of music in terms of his art and his work at this time? I think it's long been kind of understood and accepted that he would always, that music played such a kind of formative role in terms of the way that he made his art and the content even of some of his like more mature paintings. But to what extent was music, I don't know, around, like both in the air and then also what you guys were looking at?
Music was a big part. I mean, art encompasses music, correct, right? So everything was it wasn't delineated so much. You could be a filmmaker be in a band, and you know, you could do.
And many people were.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and he was as well. But music was a very important part of his art. And he always carried around a boombox, as people did. But his was a little red.
You might need to explain to some people what
Okay,
a
a
boombox
boombox.
is.
It's like a.
Those who are students in the audience
Yes,
might not
okay.
know what that
So
is.
a boombox was like a radio cassette player at the time, but there was no headphone. There may have been a headphone jack, but we didn't use those. It was about broadcasting for yourself and whoever was nearby what you were listening to.
Thank you.
But you gotta tell them, right? You know, all the homeboys and the rappers were walking around these big boom boxes with, you know, Run DMC or, you know,
Right.
Who's in the
Mr.
way mountain or
Flash,
something.
The Message,
The
you
Message.
know, or even the first one, Rapper's Delight, you know, everybody was that. But here comes Jean with like
Einstürze and Neubauten or
yeah,
something.
yeah, white noise, like, on his boombox, and you hear a mile away this dude like, and you turn like, and say, damn, who is that? You know, so he was never like with hip hop.
Yeah,
He was always like some weird shit. You'd be like, wow, Jean, okay, you know, and he'd be like,
But
The second side flow.
yeah, yeah, right. The Eno, like the really
Yeah.
or
emo
yeah,
stuff.
Eno.
or
Yeah,
Eno.
but you know, I used to I'd go see him DJ a lot and hang out in the booth and sorry to say do drugs with him. But there was one of the things that all the artists were making music, all the musicians were making films, all the filmmakers were writing or whatever. There was a great cross pollination that way. but there was a lot of hybridity going on. And it really, as the 70s kind of ended, all these things like heavy dub reggae, kind of the no wave punk, disco had already been run out, but then you had people like Larry Levan at the Paradise Garage, or Mark Kamen's up at Danceteria, or Anita down the Mud Club. All the DJs, they all started playing everyone else's music. And you had this incredible hybridity. You had this kind of mutant sound. And Jean was really pretty interesting that way. And I heard this funny story recently, like, cause he was DJing for, I always would see him at this place, Madame Rose's. I don't know if you ever went there. But he was DJing a bit at Area, which was kind of a snooty club where the Uptown came down to see downtown creativity. But, and I think it was Johnny Dynell was like the main DJ there. And he was like, one point, because he was a real supporter of Jean-Michel, I was like, no, man, come back and DJ again, stuff like that. He goes like, and then one night it was just like, an hour of John Coltrane's kind of a little rough on this audience. And Jean-Michel was like, if they can't dance to Coltrane, they can't dance. Which, is kind of like this really a beautiful notion of music, because dance is, of course, always about the beat. And Coltrane's always this kind of interstitial, out of space, and the idea that you would dance to that is this, to me, it describes his musical
And
thing.
was this moment before or after he had kind of exploded?
With DJing at Area, he was already famous. DJing at Madame Rose's, he was already kind of on a decline.
Okay.
His world had gotten really small, and it was just kind of him alone in the booth. And he had Test Pattern and Gray, and those were pretty short-lived. I mean,
those are the
they have
bands
this,
that he
these are the
was a
bands
part
he
of.
was in with Michael Holman and Nick.
And there's we discovered this actually in Denver, that some of the, what we refer to as scripts in the exhibition are actually notes for a set list for Gray. I mean, Michael figured that out for us.
Yeah.
But Gray was a short-lived kind of noise band that was more about performance, right, than actual
Very
music,
theatrical.
right?
And one other thing I just add, because I think it's really smart the way these shows are woven together in a way, even as separate histories. And the idea of the street certainly runs through them, but it's also the idea of dance. And like, if you think of Keith he was a regular at Paradise Garage. That was this, gay dance scene, which was really hermetic. They didn't really allow women much very often. What?
Did you go?
I bet, but, it wasn't quite the Saint. It was a little better. But also, if you look at a lot of his figures, they're dancing kind of, break dancing figures. Ryan, like I've traveled with that guy. He seems really buttoned down, but like all of a sudden when I'm going to bed, he's going to go out dancing. So there's that where Jean-Michel did dance and all that, and then of course, with my show. So I think that I guess because most of my ideas come from someone else. I was watching, there's this wonderful girl, Malia Scharf, one of Kenny's daughters. Kenny Scharf was really good friends with Keith and Jean-Michel, kind of inseparable for a short time. And Tony Shafrazi was their, was a big supporter for all of them. That sold a lot of their work really early on. And so Tony's in this documentary that Malia's doing on her dad, Kenny Scharf. And Tony's like this crazy, grumpy old man, and I love him dearly, but he's a freak. But he just has this great moment where he's like, he kind of does a little like, dance moves, snap his finger things, and he goes, what was important or the difference about these three artists is that they danced. And beforehand, artists didn't dance. And I think taking that aspect into their work, kind of, well, Edith Deoch was a great writer when she just passed away this last year, but she was a great early writer for that time and big supporter of Jean specifically, but she called it clubbism. She had like this idea that like really the culture that was being born, whether it was visual art or music or theater or dance or any of these things, was coming out of club culture and out of this incredible moment of mixing of all these different things of, as you say, like this thing of like, yeah, there's only a dozen people there, but they're all creative. And so there was no distinction between performer and audience. That big kind of pompous thing we'd inherited from the 70s with arena rock and stuff like that. So it was kind of fundamental to all of them, I think.
Absolutely, and I think, again, going back to this idea that no one necessarily identified as like a painter or as a photographer. You know, everyone was doing everything, and I think there's, in part because of where you were living and because New York City was bankrupt and there was no oversight, there was no like administrative oversight or policing or management or of the neighborhood, then I would imagine that really kind of enabled so much more, to your point, cross-pollinization, you know, that sampling of this or that and bringing it all in, and dance and that idea of, you know, using your body as, or not even using it, but allowing your body to be its creative driver is so, I mean, it's like we can see it now so easily in looking retrospectively at all of their work, but I don't think it's been given, to your point, I don't think it's been given the credit that it deserves in terms of helping to distinguish what they've done as a contributing factor to help them get to where.
And then, of course, by the 80s, the painters started making money, and the underground filmmakers at one time, I think, were kind of the hippest people on the scene. Like, everyone wanted to be like in an Amos Poe film or something like that, and it's like, that, you know, it just kind of,
well, because that's like where authenticity was, you know, like once you start making a lot of money and can wear fancy suits and, you know, you're rolling in a certain crowd, like you lost that authenticity. And it seems like in this moment, when you guys were all living in this small neighborhood with this small community, it was as authentic as it could get.
I don't hold to the notion that you have to be poor and broke to be an authentic artist. I think that what you have to be able to do is just keep it together, keep your head together, you know, keep your focus on what you're doing, you know, and I think that proves difficult for people in anything when they start making a little money. They, you know, it gets a little, you know, like this, and so you have to be able to keep it together. Many artists from that time were able to keep it together, and they have made money and continue to make work, and very good work, and they've been able to grow and stuff. So, you know.
And sometimes they don't change so much. It's like, it's just really weird. Everyone changes around them.
Yeah.
Like when money and fame enter into the picture, and they really, I mean, the CBGB scene that's what destroyed it. Was all of a sudden like a few bands like Blondie and Talking Heads made a lot of money, and then a really important band like Television didn't, for various reasons. I'm not, you know, but those kind of differences that happen are what change it. And I think this is, you know, I try to forgive my friends who become successful. It's hard though, but you know, people just react differently around them, and it changes everything.
Can you guys talk a little bit about, I feel like there's a current kind of nostalgia for New York in this era. You can see it at MoMA just opened a Club 57, basically homage show. There's the Boom for Real that's in London and traveling to Germany. Your dear friend Sarah Driver is coming out with a documentary film about all of this. We have our show. Just can you speak a little bit to your thoughts as to why everyone's looking back at the same time?
I'll try that first. I'll have something smarter to say.
Don't believe any of that.
I'm really, I have to be really wary of nostalgia. I think we all should. It's kind of toxic. Honestly, it's not a helpful thing. New York's always had that. No matter when you arrived in New York, oh, you got there in '74, girl, you just missed it. Like, if you'd only been there 5 minutes early, you might have seen Hendrix play at that little cafe. New York's always like, whenever you get there, you just missed it. And then we have to be careful because a lot of our memories are also we're remembering being young, right? So like, I have to check myself all the time and we do turn into grumpy old people in New York. Oh, goddamn, these kids are so fucking entitled. They don't even pay attention to the people who've lived here forever. You know, we have to do that. I think that like, I was kind of supporting a lot of photographers coming out of Detroit in that moment, which is, I guess we call it ruins porn now, right? You know, that people like, you know, Scott Hawking and stuff like that, this was amazing work, and it is kind of part of the, but I feel like we're being turned into like bad HBO melodramas between like.
Well, there's that too. I mean,
Yeah.
that there's this populist appropriation or referencing of or elevating of even of New York in that moment. And,
They weren't like good old days. It was really horrible in some ways, don't you think? I mean, it was kind
Yeah,
of
it
fun,
was-
but let's not like
it was
over romanticize it. It was really rough. It was-
well, that's what I'm getting at, is like, can you speak to what really was happening? As amazing as all of these, you know, aspects of it are that you guys are sharing with us, I mean, I know that it was a little sketchy when, you know, you were walking home and.
No, it was totally sketchy. I mean, there could be you could be walking down the street and coming to your house, down the block, and there could be a shootout and you'd have to duck inside. You know, the front door was constantly being broken open, and then we'd have to like barricade it, you know, downstairs. And, you know, that was the most important lock, you know, to the system, you know, and so we were in a homestead, and so we were constantly trying to protect the homestead. You know, my apartment, I had a camera, which I bought a Nikon, and was taking photographs in my apartment and of bands at the time, but I rarely took my camera out on the street because I thought it was too dangerous.
Right.
And then my apartment was broken into and the camera was stolen. But, you know, that was.
Well, I remember, you know, not to wax nostalgic about these horrible old days, but my girlfriend at the time, who's now been my wife for 35 years, I wanted her to meet my mom, and my mom lived uptown. And then Tessa is never really late to anything, and she was kind of late, and you know, we didn't have cell phones then. So I was, you know, so she showed up eventually, and she was like really apologetic. It's like, no, it's my fault. I wanted to dress up nice, like to meet your mom.
Right.
But of course, because she was dressed nice and white, someone mugged her. So it was like, and then of course she didn't have like subway fare at that point. So it became a big palaver. But like immediately, like it was kind of her fault for having even thought of going uptown and dressing nice. It was just a bad thing to do. And I think it was a really complex situation. Like we've kind of talked of New York as America's this great melting pot, and New York was where it happened. Things didn't melt that well together easily. There was a lot of real problems in there, and there were kids I loved as little kids who then like 5 years later would mug me, and I'd be like, I'm gonna fucking tell your mom.
Right.
You know, but it's like, it was complicated, you know?
Was there resentment for all of these young people, young artists coming into a neighborhood that had been primarily, you know, let's say families, but.
Well, it was Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican, Dominicano also, there's a lot of them. But, yeah, there was a lot, I think there was some tensions with that. It didn't, not so much at the beginning. They didn't like our noise.
Yes, which speaks to the super in your apartment, who Jean had a graffiti war with him after he questioned him coming into the building late at night with this boom box, blasting noise music. The super of Felice's apartment, you know, was like, this guy's gotta leave. You can tell the story better.
Oh, no, it just
And-
was,
yeah.
yeah, but that's what happened, you know. I mean, Jean, you know, he was from the city, so, you know, he was, you know, Haitian and Puerto Rican or Jamaican, but from the city, so.
From Brooklyn.
Yeah, from Brooklyn, so he knew how to deal with it. You know, like I was trying to be nice to Mr. Gonzalez and his family, and you know, trying to keep my apartment cool. And when Mr. John would come in at 3 a.m. with noise music, which filled up the whole stairway, and you could hear him even asleep. You knew Jean was coming home. And Mr. Gonzalez comes outside. He's like, "What the fuck, man? Turn that shit off." And Jean said, "Go back to sleep, old man." And Mr. Gonzalez got so livid, he told me, "You gotta get rid of that guy." Then Jean wrote on the wall, "pendejo," which in Spanish means it's a very negative term. And Mr. Gonzalez took that to heart, and so it was a constant. I think something happened with a TV, or he slashed Jean's tires. I don't know. On his bike I don't know. But anyway, they had a war going, you know. But I don't know. I wonder, because you all know about art history a lot more than I do. I wonder. You know, you hear about these periods in art, like I know Paris 1919, for example, by John Cale, or certainly, you know, William de Kooning and the, you know, abstract.
We were just at the Motown Museum.
Yeah.
Okay.
You wonder if, and you probably would know very much, Nora, if all these periods who later have become so world-renowned and so revered were at one time just groups of friends making work without a lot of money.
Yes.
And sort of believing in each other and holding each other up.
Yes, I mean, Andrew can speak to it so well. His hippie modernism show explores all of that, all these different communities. But yes, history is populated with these episodes.
We had a difference because we had inherited that we'd come of age through punk rock. DIY was a kind of a specific set of strategies and operational techniques, these kind of modes of expression, which I don't think, you know. But Dave Hickey, the great Dave Hickey, I went out and taught classes with him before, and he'd always tell the students, like, okay, make some friends, form a gang, and take over the art world. And I know, like, because when I've gone to like art schools and talk, sometimes I show them all this stuff, and it's basically people who've done that. And then I get so bummed at the end when some kid goes like, "So I think I might move to New York. What gallery should I show with?" And I'm like, "Oh, you weren't listening."
You weren't paying attention.
But I mean, so if anyone does make it to New York to this MoMA show, which is about Club 57 and kind of the milieu around it, the kind of the scene from 78 to 83, I think is the dates on that show. One of the things you get a sense of is all the flyers and all the posters and all the stuff like that. You can see it in Alexis's collection with the postcards Jean-Michel is doing. There is actually one Basquiat in that. It's an obscure little thing in that Club 57 show. And what it is that Keith curated a lot of shows. Keith Haring curated a lot of shows at Club 57. And some of the early shows he did were these Xerox shows. Now we call it copy art because Xerox doesn't own that anymore. This stuff was phenomenally important. And I just see that coming up sometime this month, the Whitney is gonna do a show of called electrostatic something or other, but it's just basically all the Xeroxes from their permanent collection, which they've probably never even shown before. So it's like there is a sense that we were learning these tools of broadcasting, of communication, of kind of DIY, of self-publishing, and these were just as vital as forming a band or, a lot of Super 8 film is basically, this is the thing we inherited from our parents, the bad old home movies. Well, everyone was making little bad old home movies based off of what they thought Godard actually meant, with the worst kind of mistranslation.
What also so telling about all of this is we're talking about this in the context of a bar, dance club, that was showing all of this work, right? Club 57,
Yeah.
Mud Club, all of these places that were, for dancing, drinking, partying, whatever. it was also a space where people, I mean, Fred has talked about curating shows there and stuff, you know, and I think it's that it's not just that artists were doing things in varied disciplines, but that spaces themselves were varied as well, and that kind of, I would imagine, really enabled and encouraged people to continue in that cross-disciplinary kind of manner.
And there were some kind of great cross-generational people like Allen Ginsberg or Larry Rivers. There were, you know, our neighborhood wasn't just kids. There had been people there for a while, and there were those things. But as a generation, we were pretty different, and we were shut out. No one was going to get a show in Soho. Like that world, there was no opportunity. So a lot of these things, none of these bands were going to get signed by a major label at one point. You know, it's like everyone had to kind of create their own systems that way.
I'm going to ask one more question of you guys, and then I think we can open it up. And I just want to ask you, the Jean-Michel Basquiat has achieved a kind of mythic status in the world. You know, the fact that a painting of his sold for $110 million in the spring, I think only, you know, kind of reinforces that idea. But to what extent is this kind of myth or this phenomenon of Basquiat, how does it relate to the person and the friend that you guys actually knew, the John that you knew?
Well, he said to me and to others, I'm going to be a famous artist one day. And I believed him. I mean, I didn't know what that would mean or anything, but I believed him because he had this obvious talent, you know, emanating from him. And his work and his honesty and his deepness really came out. And he was just, you know, he was special, you know. And but it must have been when he achieved the success, which he did in his own life, but short lifetime, the pressures must have been incredible. And I really, you know, my little brush with the art world, you know, in getting this project out, showed how difficult and intense the art world is. Mm-hmm. So I've kind
the
of
art
feel
market. I always try to make that distinction,
yes,
because the art world's a big, friendly place. We all hug each other. Art market's not like that.
Okay, thank you.
How about you, Felice?
I think personally that the most important thing one of the most important things I feel about Jean-Michel, and especially related to his blackness and especially relating to black people is that, and especially relating to young black people, is that he was like Muhammad Ali in that, if you've ever seen When We Were Kings or even the Will Smith movie kind of alluded to that. He was Muhammad Ali was always saying, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest. He just was hypnotizing himself into believing that he was the greatest, that he could beat George Foreman. You know, he just was constantly saying it, and Jean-Michel was saying the same thing all the time. I'm gonna be a great artist. And people would say, no, you're not, or his father would say, get a job or something, you know, and all these things. And he got fired from some tacky company and come home, oh, you got fired? I'm gonna be a great artist, I'm a great artist, I'm gonna be great. It was his mantra. He was confident in that. And I think that personally, as I said to my niece last night, I feel one of the most important things is to have that focus of whatever you're doing, to be confident. We came from Barry Gordy's spot today, borrowed $800, he was confident, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. And so I think, besides all the money that he's made and the beautiful art that he's made and is shown all over the world, you all have to remember at that time, had a black artist ever done that before? You had a few, Romare Beardens, you had Bob Thompson, who I found out about much later. You didn't have that, and for a black man to say that at that time was huge, and he kept saying it, and it happened for him. but I think it was because of his focus, and I'm just so proud of him. And you go to schools and you show these young kids this work and talk about him, and you look at the kids and you say, okay, what do you do? What can you believe in? What can you pull out of yourself and hypnotize yourself into making it happen? And that's, for me, that's one of the most important parts of Jean-Michel's legacy.
Why don't we take a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any? Over there, yeah.
Hey, Felice, love you. We grew up together.
That's Carl right there.
But talk a little bit about, I understand the relationship between Jean-Michel and his father was a little complicated. But I was thinking, can you talk a little bit about that and how it may have affected his art and his work, and maybe his spirit and possibly his sense of what you were saying, his desire or his mantra, his will to become a great artist?
Well, actually, there's someone here, not here today, Jennifer Jazz, who has got a piece in the book that's sold upstairs. She's a writer. She's a Caribbean American artist, a writer, and she also lived with us and was part of our scene, and her and Jean fought all the time. You know, I think he liked her, and she, you know, many girls liked him at that time. She was so charismatic, but she did not like him, and she was really hard on him. And so they had this kind of push-pull thing going. But she also had a very difficult relationship with her family, as, you know, young Caribbean American. I mean, any child who says to their parent, I want to be an artist, you know, you're like, okay, you know, and if you're, you know, from a working class, and certainly from an African-American family, and you tell your accountant dad or your teacher mom that you're going to be an artist, they don't want to hear that. They're not hearing that. You know, you're working hard, you're going to go to college, you're going to do something. So I don't know, and I think, Alexis, you might have met Mr. Basquiat, or maybe you did.
Yeah.
I never met him, but I can only imagine that he was not having it. You know, Jean, like running around, you know, with like no socks on and Canal Street coat, you know, talking that he's going to be an artist. So, but then,
We were all rebelling at the time.
yeah, but it means so much to people who have nothing and have built something up for their child to kind of want to go back to having nothing and living a marginal life. I'm sure, you know, his father was pissed, you know? And so, I don't know, you guys could speak to that.
And we were the neighborhood that people had worked so hard to escape from.
Right.
That's
You have to understand, the Lower East Side was where the poor immigrants arrived. So for a lot of the kids who were repopulating that neighborhood, it's like, it was unfathomable. It's like, do you know how hard your grandparents worked?
To get out.
So we could like never have to be there, and now it's
Right.
even more run down?
Right.
And
So,
you're coming back here.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he ran away from home so much while he technically still lived at home. He
Yeah.
was much closer with his mother than his father. And so there wasn't a very strong relationship
But
there.
then,
And bless City As, because my kids now just started college, but so I've just even through I can do an age group right through the moment. City As is this, which is where Jean-Michel ended up, is a really kind of what?
High school.
High school. I'm sorry. Yes. So it saved a lot of not my kid, but a lot of our peer groups' kids. It's a place where kids who aren't doing well in school are kind of given opportunities to find out what they can do and get a degree out of it and stuff like that. So I think that was and that's where, of course, he knows Al from, right? Or no, he knew Al from, yeah, yeah.
and Shannon.
Al Diaz, with
Yeah,
whom
and
he
Sharon
did
Dawson.
a lot
Sorry.
of SAMA work.
Mhm.
Yes.
Can you talk about the bands he was in or he started? Talk about the music. Was it consequential? Is this music we could go back as things that might have had any influence, or was it more
Okay, so, what to say about that? They weren't the biggest bands in New York, straight up. Yeah, I mean, it just,
But like I looked and there are no recordings of
no,
Pray.
it wasn't,
We
you know,
can't
it was
find
more
it.
like they played at A's and places like that. It was really art damaged. There was a lot of people at that time doing music that probably spoke better to the it wasn't, I'm not talking about populism or mainstream or anything like that, but New York is a city of diversity, and what happened in music then, when I think of, I don't know, even Conk, which, you know, Shannon was in, and it was a friend of Jean-Michel at the time, or Kid Creole and the Coconuts, or there were all these groups that like spoke to this kind of, to the wider group of people, and then somehow like a lot of the noise stuff was really hermetic and just kind of off in its own place. Is that a fair way to put it, Felice?
Oh, sure. I mean, I just want to split one thing and just say to Carl, even though Jean-Michel had a difficult relationship with his father was an accountant. So when his stuff started to change, his father was the main man.
Oh,
You feel me? His father
Right to the,
his father kept his SH together. You know what I mean? For real. So it was, you know, and I think they made up as, you know.
he was very proud of him in the end.
He needed, and Jean needed his father, you know, because his father was in his corner and knew how to watch the money, you know? So it's like that. As far as the music, I went to a rehearsal because I was playing bass. I was just learning how to play. And I went, they said, oh, please come to rehearsal, you know, as a bass player. So I went down there, you know, and I was like, you know, I was like 4 years older than these guys. So I walk in and I know how to play like E minor and D. So already I know more than them. And I know the names of the strings. So already, you know, I'm ahead. And they walked in, and like Michael is like pounding away, and John is like blowing on the saxophone, on the clarinet. And I'd be like, wow, man, this is what you guys are doing, you know, because I'm trying to write songs, you know, like, Fairport Convention or something. And he's like, I was like, wow, maybe not. You know, I had like my little $45 bass, and I was like, I'm gonna take my shit home, you know. But I went down there and hung. It was like their thing was like a hang, you know. They were hanging and pounding away. It was very. They loved, you know, kind of industrial music, and so it was like that. But Michael talks about some performances that they did, performance art. It was kind of a noise-based performance art thing with a very industrial beat, and like a weird saxophone on top. Clarinet on top of it. You know, and Shannon with the trumpet. But it was cool, you know, it was cool.
Yeah, Bud.
I never asked you this, but a lot of New York stories are about real estate to this day. And do you ever think of what would happen, would have happened had you not given Jean-Michel that space to work in? And also, it's impossible to overestimate the importance that music had in our lives at that point. So not only did you give him the space to work, but you gave him the space for music to play constantly. And do you think if you had not met, would he have, just as he was unique, what you gave him,
Absolutely.
So
would he have turned out the same way? Would there be a counter narrative?
let me just repeat the question in case others didn't hear it. The question was to Alexis. Do you think that Jean would have become the same artist if he hadn't been given this space, which was their apartment, and not just a space to create, but also a space where music played constantly?
Well, it was definitely a place to get off the street as well, you know, a place, I mean, if you're living, I'm sure it's difficult to do art, but to do it without a home and a place to go back to and work out your thoughts, you know, it would be more challenging, but it was definitely a moment. And he was able to get his, you know, I could see he was gathering his forces at the time, constantly. He was like, you know, I call it now the laboratory, because I work in a laboratory, but it was, you know, he was able to really formulate and, you know, look, you know, gather his references, you know, right before he was ready to break out.
I think that we try to make that point in the exhibition too, where there are these two paintings from his like more mature period at the end that hopefully you then look back at everything you just saw before you come to those two, and you see all of these early kind of seeds that are present in the work that he made when you lived together. The collage, the incorporation of text and image, the music influence, all of that is like full blown in these later paintings, but it's all evident in the material he made when he was with you.
One of the things I just want to add to it, because one of the things that I love about what you have and reminds me so much of that time was the scale, because we weren't Soho artists. We didn't have lofts. No one was making like large work. It all had this like fit in your crappy little tenement apartment, like but a kind of domesticity. 6th floor walk-up tenement apartment. And so there's something about integrating this domestic space into art making, which produces a different kind of art, and it's not bad. And that's sometimes when we rediscover women artists who've been neglected for years, and you kind of go like, oh yeah, they didn't quite have that space, and you get into this kind of intimate relationship with art. It's kind of magnificent, way more than like the acres of canvas that get sold for big bucks sometimes.
I just feel one thing that, you know, I was saying to Damara last night, that because Jean and I, you know, were both, maybe it's just because of the people we were, you know, that I felt so, you know, I loved him, but, you know, I didn't give him what Alexis gave him. You know, to me, he was like a little brother, and he could come and hang, and I'd come home from work and he'd paint it on the walls. But man, don't paint on my walls. What's wrong with you? I'm working and you're painting on the walls and, you know, leaving this shit all over the floor. You know, I mean, that's just maybe my like lower middle class thing or bourgeois thing or whatever, but I wasn't having it. I would clean up this shit, man, you know, and, you know, that type of thing, because that's who I was, you know. But when he went to Alexis, she gave him the space to paint on the walls and encouraged him to paint on the walls and leave all the shit on the floor. And she gave him encouragement that he needed, you know, that he needed. So it was just invaluable what she provided for him. Just invaluable, you know.
Okay, let's, yes.
Hi, yeah, I really appreciate this conversation about it. It's fascinating. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the time, the transition between when he was hanging out with you guys and then when you met Warhol. Did you see him change? Was there sort of a loss of innocence?
I remember that day, the day he came home and he said, because he was still staying with me, or I don't know if he was in, but I just remember the day he came home and said, I sold Andy Warhol bought a postcard. And we were like, what? And they're like, yeah, Andy Warhol bought a postcard for $35. And we were like, what? Really? Wow, Jean, that's great. You know, we were like so happy. He was really happy.
Yeah, he really, that was.
So that's my bit of that, but probably y'all could talk to that more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the collaborations are a little problematic, though I think people are beginning to appreciate the work they did together a little more. What's easy to forget is actually how low Warhol was in his career at that time. Like, no museums were going to give a Warhol a show. I knew collectors who were trying to donate major Warhol works to museums, and they didn't even want them. Andy was really, he had been doing portraits of rich people, like a lot of stuff, some stuff now, which again, we're beginning to reappreciate and understand its value. But really, in a way, as much as Warhol acted as a father figure to a lot of us in some weird way. I mean, at least, I don't know about you, but I'm the same age as Jean-Michel and Keith, who also worshipped him. Their success and their adulation of Andy reinvented Warhol in a whole new way. So it's not really a personal anecdote, but it's something which gets forgotten, is how much they actually did for Warhol.
Yep. But maybe if you guys could speak for a second to just, not just maybe when he met Warhol, but when he became famous in his own, so famous that he could collaborate with Warhol, and that distinction between from the time when you
That's
knew
just
him.
such a sad story.
Yeah, it was kind of, it
wanna
was
talk
so
about it.
it was a meteor, it was like shot up, and the art world, like the art market
Yeah.
part of the art world is very intimidating and oppressive, and it must have been very difficult. It changed John, and how could it not have? And, the forces working on him, he wasn't allowed to just be free like we were out on the streets, and just, he was no longer able to.
And everybody he knew was trying to borrow money.
Yeah.
I knew I was like, hey, John.
I need a new bass. I broke the string.
All right, maybe we'll do one more question. Yes?
All right, so, on Basquiat's first show, like, what was he asking as far as, like, pricing for it?
Which first, I mean, like when he's, I didn't even finish the Keith, the thing about the moment thing, sorry, just on that tangent.
Okay.
So what it is there is that Keith did the Xerox show, Jean-Michel did a drawing, crumpled it up, and Keith then Xeroxed that, but Keith held on to that. Keith already knew how important, in his mind, Jean-Michel was. At that show, you probably, if you'd offered him $20, he probably would have given. He was selling the postcards on the street for just a few bucks.
Yeah.
There he was doing with
$35.
Susan.
No, that's not happening.
No, that's like,
That's
That
what
was
Warhol paid.
Warhol's
Yeah.
price.
Yeah.
I know they were like
$5
$5.
max.
and they,
But like
the
the,
sweatshirts
um,
were 25.
The New York New Wave at PS1, where all those paintings were bought from,
Diego, I
yeah.
think, basically
So
sold that
like,
shit.
were those for like a few $100s each, or like a few $1,000s?
Like
Does
a few
anyone know?
I think a few thousand.
A few thousand.
I think those,
So that's pretty material when you're paying $80 in rent
yeah.
per month.
One thing I will say too, I mean, everyone loves how much his paintings sell for, and that's beautiful, but, doggone it, he died at 27. He didn't get to have kids. I have a kid. He didn't get to see so many parts of life. So I'm so happy that he became so famous, but in some ways I feel so sorry for him, because Julian Schnabel got to grow up and have a family, and so many artists got to have families and get it together and keep working, and he didn't get that chance. And so I admire that he's so well respected and he made so much money, but I wish he had lived a little longer,
Absolutely.
just for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, thank you for such an illuminating conversation.
Thank you.
This was
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.